On a routine flight, a black passenger's dignity is shattered by a single, scornful remark that exposes deep-seated prejudice. Every whispered insult and icy glance transforms her journey into a painful battleground of humiliation. Her silent struggle against injustice sparks a defiant flame, setting the stage for a transformative story of resilience and truth. Watch until the end to see how this incredible story unfolds, and let us know what time you're watching today. The morning light poured into the airport through enormous windows, warming the polished floors and filling the space with a soft, golden glow. People hurried along the corridors, dragging their suitcases and chatting in gentle voices. The air carried the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with a faint hint of jet fuel from the open tarmac. It was a busy, lively place, yet beneath the everyday bustle, there was a quiet feeling, almost as if the day held a secret promise of change. Elena walked through the terminal with calm, steady steps. She wore a neat uniform in deep navy and silver, and her eyes were dark and clear, watching everything with a quiet intensity. To everyone else, she was simply a dedicated flight attendant, moving gracefully among the passengers. But deep inside, Elena carried a secret that made her feel both strong and heavy at the same time. In truth, she was the owner of the very airline she served, a secret she guarded closely. Each day, as she helped travelers and kept order, she also fought an inner battle against the unfairness and prejudice that sometimes marred the world. Not far from Elena, a woman named Amara sat in a quiet corner of the terminal. Amara was a black woman with a gentle yet strong presence. She wore a smart, well-fitted coat, and her deep brown eyes shone with both wisdom and a quiet determination. Clutching a well-worn book in her hands, she appeared lost in thought. Amara was no stranger to the cold stares and whispered remarks of strangers. Over the years, she had learned to hold her head high, even when others looked at her with suspicion or disdain. Today, as she quietly read, there was a sense in her eyes that she was ready for whatever might come next. As the day went on, Elena moved through the terminal with care. She paused at a service desk, gently resting her gloved hand on the cool marble. In the reflection of the glass, she saw the lines of determination on her face, lines that told a story of past struggles and hard-won lessons. The memory of previous days, when injustice had hurt so many, made her heart beat faster. She thought of the time she had seen people treated unfairly and promised herself, in a whisper only she could hear, that she would stand up against such wrongs no matter what. A little further away, a young attendant named Jasmine talked quietly with a colleague near one of the boarding gates. Jasmine's voice was soft, almost a murmur, but her words carried a deep concern. "Something feels off today," she said. "I've seen people glancing at each other like they're expecting trouble." Her simple observation drifted through the air, adding to the feeling that this day was not quite like any other. In another corner of the terminal, an older gentleman named Marcus watched the scene with kind, caring eyes. Marcus was known for his gentle support of others. His face, marked by years of experience, softened whenever he looked at someone in need. Today, he noticed Amara and offered her a warm, understanding smile. It was a small gesture, but it spoke of a deep respect for her strength and dignity. Even if his role was small, Marcus believed that every act of kindness was important. Soon, the announcement for boarding came over the loudspeaker. The voice was steady and calm, yet it carried an undercurrent of authority that reminded everyone to be respectful and orderly. Elena stepped forward and began helping passengers with their boarding passes. As she spoke, her words were simple and clear. "Welcome aboard. Please have your boarding pass and ID ready. Let's make sure everything goes smoothly." In that moment, her voice seemed to echo more than just instructions. It was a quiet promise that respect and fairness would be at the heart of the journey. As people started lining up for the airplane, the atmosphere in the terminal shifted. There was a mix of excitement and an unspoken tension, like the calm before a sudden storm. Elena's eyes moved from face to face, and for a moment, they met Amara's. In that brief look, There was an unspoken conversation, a shared understanding that both had faced the harshness of the world in their own ways. For Elena, it was a reminder of injustice she had seen and felt, and for Amara, it was a confirmation of her own quiet strength in the face of constant challenges. Later, as the passengers made their way onto the plane, Elena slipped away to a quiet corner near the boarding area. In the stillness of that small space, she closed her eyes for a few seconds and listened to the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clatter of footsteps. In that brief silence, her thoughts turned inward. She remembered the many times she had seen injustice and discrimination, and she felt the weight of her secret even more strongly. Yet, she also felt a spark of hope. Deep in her heart, she knew that even if her true identity remained hidden for now, her actions could still make a difference. Every kind word, every small act of care, was a step toward a fairer, more compassionate world. On board the airplane, the cabin was calm and softly lit. The seats were arranged neatly, and the overhead lights cast a gentle glow over the passengers. The hum of the plane's engines was steady and soothing, like the heartbeat of the journey itself. Elena moved down the aisle with practiced ease, checking on each passenger. She offered warm smiles, helped with luggage, and made sure everyone felt welcome. Even though her mind was busy with the heavy thoughts of the day, she focused on each small moment, believing that every act of kindness mattered. At one point, Elena passed by Amara once again. Amara had left her seat for a moment, stretching her legs and looking out the window at the endless blue sky. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. In that quiet, shared glance, there was a deep understanding. Both women had known hardship and pain, yet they also held on to hope. It was a silent promise, a belief that change was possible, even in the smallest gestures of respect and care. As the plane began to move along the runway, the sounds of the busy terminal faded into a distant memory. The cabin became a small world of its own, filled with the quiet energy of people on the move. In one corner, a group of airline staff whispered among themselves, their voices low but filled with concern. One of them said softly, "I heard that even a small mistake can cause big trouble." The others nodded, each aware that even on a calm day, the past could suddenly come back to haunt them. Their hushed words added to the growing feeling that today would not be a day like any other. Elena felt the weight of those words as she continued her work. She knew that troubles sometimes began as small sparks, easily ignored by many. But she also believed that these sparks could grow into something important, a chance to make things right. Every smile she offered, every helping hand she extended, was a quiet rebellion against the unfairness that still lingered in the world. Outside, the plane ascended into the sky, leaving behind the busy terminal and the worries of the ground. The blue heavens stretched endlessly above, filled with the promise of a new day. Inside the cabin, the gentle murmur of conversations mixed with the soft whir of the engine, creating a peaceful yet charged atmosphere. For Elena, this moment was both a pause and a beginning. It was a chance to reflect on her own journey, a journey that had been full of both sorrow and hope. She remembered the days when every act of injustice had left a scar, and she vowed that she would do everything in her power to mend those scars with kindness and respect. Amara, sitting by the window, felt the same mix of reflection and anticipation. The view of the vast sky reminded her of all the paths life could take. She had spent many years facing prejudice, sometimes feeling alone and misunderstood. But now, on this flight, she felt a quiet strength rising inside her. The book she held was not just a story of distant lands and brave heroes. It was a reminder that every person had a part to play in creating a better world. In her heart, she believed that even the smallest voice could speak loudly when it came from a place of truth and hope. As the flight continued, each passenger settled into their own little world. Some talked quietly with their neighbors, sharing smiles and small stories, while others lost themselves in thoughts of the past and dreams for the future. Elena walked back and forth along the aisle, her eyes always gentle and kind. She made sure to check on everyone, from the nervous traveler to the tired elderly person. Her simple acts of care were like tiny seeds of change, planted in a place where they could one day grow into something beautiful. In the soft light of the cabin, every detail felt important. A child's quiet giggle, an elderly passenger's thankful smile, and even a passing glance between two strangers all added up to a tapestry of shared humanity. Elena knew that the journey was not only about reaching a destination, but also about the small moments that made life meaningful. In that moving space, the values of kindness, fairness, and respect were quietly at work. Elena's thoughts often drifted back to the many times she had seen injustice. She remembered the sharp words, the hurtful looks, and the moments when people were made to feel less than they truly were. Those memories were painful, but they also filled her with a fierce determination. She promised herself that no matter how heavy the secret she carried, she would continue to stand up for what was right. Even if she had to hide her true identity, she would use her position to care for and protect every person who deserved to be treated with dignity. As the airplane sailed higher into the sky, the gentle murmur of conversations gave way to quiet reflection. In a soft corner near the back of the cabin, Elena paused for a moment. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In that quiet space, she could almost hear the hearts of everyone around her beating with their own hopes and dreams. It was a small, silent promise that no one was truly alone, that even in a world that could be harsh and unfair, every life was full of meaning. Amara, too, felt the power of that moment. She looked out the window at the endless blue, feeling as if the sky itself was full of possibilities. In her heart, she knew that her life had been shaped by both pain and hope, and that she had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. Even though she had been hurt by the cruelty of others, she believed that one day the world would learn to see beauty in every person. That belief, small as it might have seemed, was a light in the darkness. Throughout the flight, the small acts of care and the shared glances between strangers wove a quiet, hopeful story. Elena, with her hidden secret and determined heart, and Amara, with her dignified strength and gentle resolve, became symbols of a belief that every moment mattered. They were two souls traveling together on a path that was as much about inner growth as it was about reaching a destination. In the soft, continuous hum of the airplane's engines, time seemed to slow down. The ordinary became extraordinary as every small detail was filled with meaning. Elena thought about all the times a kind word had made a difference. She remembered the warmth of a smile and the gentle comfort of a helping hand. Even on days when the weight of her secret felt too heavy, those moments of shared humanity gave her the strength to keep moving forward. Outside the window, the sun continued to rise, and the blue sky seemed to promise that no matter what happened, a new day would always begin. Inside the airplane, every person was part of a small community, a community built on hope, resilience, and the simple belief that every act of kindness could change the world. Elena and Amara, along with everyone else on board, were on a journey that went far beyond the physical flight. It was a journey of the heart, a quiet testament to the power of empathy and the strength of the human spirit. In that moving space, every whispered conversation, every shared look, and every quiet act of kindness was a step toward a future where fairness and respect would win over prejudice and pain. Elena's secret, though heavy and hidden, was a reminder that sometimes true power lies not in what we show to the world, but in the gentle strength of our hearts and the quiet courage to do what is right. As the flight continued its steady path across the sky, the people on board began to feel a growing sense of unity. They might have come from different places and carried different stories, but in that moment, they were bound together by a simple truth, that each one of them deserved kindness and respect. For Elena, that truth was both a burden and a beacon. Every time she offered a smile or a kind word, she was silently fighting against the injustice that had marked her own past. And every time Amara looked out the window, She remembered that her strength had been forged in the fires of adversity, making her a quiet force for change. In the gentle quiet of the airplane, as the landscape of the world stretched out beneath them, the seeds of change were being planted. With each passing moment, the ordinary journey turned into an extraordinary one, a journey where every face told story and every heart carried the promise of a brighter future. Elena and Amara, each in their own way, were part of that unfolding story, a story written not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday acts of courage and compassion. And so, as the airplane sailed on toward its destination, the passengers carried with them the silent hope that someday the world would be a kinder place. It was a hope built on the belief that every act of fairness and every moment of empathy could help to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. Elena's eyes, full of quiet determination, and Amara's steady gaze, filled with dignified strength, spoke of a promise that went far beyond the simple journey through the sky. It was a promise of change, a promise that every small act of care could light the way to a better tomorrow. In that moment, as the blue sky stretched endlessly outside and the soft hum of the engines filled the cabin, the journey was not just about travel. It was a journey of the soul, a chance for each person to rediscover the beauty of kindness and the power of unity. Elena, Amara, and all those on board were part of a larger tapestry, a tapestry woven from the threads of hope, resilience, and the belief that no matter how dark the night might seem, the dawn would always come. And as the airplane continued its steady flight across the vast, open sky, the quiet promise of a new day shone like a beacon in every heart. It was a promise that every life, no matter how small or overlooked, was full of worth. In that gentle moment of shared silence and unspoken understanding, the seeds of a kinder future were sown, ready to grow into a world where justice, respect, and compassion would always prevail. The airplane continued its journey high above the clouds, a quiet world of humming engines and whispered conversations. At first, the cabin felt calm, a gentle pause in the steady march of routine. But as the flight progressed, small ripples of tension began to stir among the passengers. Elena moved along the narrow aisle, her eyes scanning each face with careful attention. She had always prided herself on maintaining order and kindness on every flight. Yet today, something felt different. Every smile she offered carried an undercurrent of worry, as if she were bracing herself for an unexpected storm. In her heart, Elena carried a secret so heavy that even the smallest misstep made her pulse quicken. A secret that gave her the power to change the rules, but also the burden of watching them break around her. Across the aisle, Amara sat quietly, trying to lose herself in the pages of her book. The soft murmur of the other passengers and the gentle clink of seatbelts being fastened were a familiar comfort. But even Amara could sense that today was not an ordinary day. Her eyes, deep and thoughtful, often lifted from the pages to survey the cabin. She noticed the uneasy glances, the hurried whispers between strangers, and the way even the smallest disruption seemed magnified in the close space of the aircraft. The first sign of trouble came unexpectedly. A middle-aged man in a neat suit shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he noticed Amara's bag, which she had carefully tucked into the overhead compartment. The man frowned and leaned toward his neighbor. In a low, indignant voice he said, "I believe that bag shouldn't be there. There isn't enough room for everyone." His words carried a tone that hinted at more than just concern over luggage. It was a sharp, pricking accusation. Amara looked up, startled. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice steady despite the sudden attention. "I made sure it was placed properly." But the man's discontent was already spreading like wildfire. Other passengers began murmuring, and the atmosphere grew, charged with unease. Elena, who was busy checking on several passengers, noticed the rising agitation. She walked over and gently addressed the man. "Sir, please relax. We are all doing our best to ensure everyone's comfort. If there's a problem, let's work together to solve it." Her tone was calm and even, but there was an edge of firmness that suggested she would not tolerate any further disruption. The man, still visibly irate, grumbled something under his breath before returning to his seat. For a moment, it seemed the situation might resolve itself quietly. But then, as if the tension needed a spark to ignite, a different voice cut through the murmur of the cabin. "Miss, could you please come here for a moment?" called a passenger from a row further down. The request was polite enough, but it carried an unspoken urgency. All eyes turned toward Amara. Her heart pounded as she closed her book slowly and gathered her things. She moved toward the small area at the front of the cabin, where a few passengers had gathered in quiet clusters. Elena followed, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. When Amara reached the group, one of the passengers, a well-dressed woman with a furrowed brow, stepped forward. "I'm sorry," the woman said, addressing Amara, "but I think you might have sat in a seat that was reserved for someone else. I noticed your ticket doesn't match this row." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Amara's eyes widened in disbelief. "I'm certain this is my seat," she replied, her voice low but steady. "I checked my boarding pass twice." The woman's lips tightened, and the tension in the small circle thickened. It wasn't long before another passenger joined in, questioning whether Amara had followed all the instructions. Elena arrived at that moment, her presence commanding attention as she stepped between Amara and the murmuring crowd. "Please, everyone, let's keep calm," she said, her voice firm but measured. Turning to Amara, she asked, "Can you show me your boarding pass?" The request was routine, yet it carried a weight that made Amara's hand tremble as she fumbled for it. For a long, heavy moment, silence reigned. The overhead lights seemed too bright, and the soft hum of the engine filled every pause between breaths. Elena studied the boarding pass carefully, her eyes flicking over every detail. Then, with a tight sigh, she said, "It appears there has been a mistake. This seat is indeed reserved, but you may have been assigned to a different area." Amara's cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and rising anger. "I was told this was my seat," she said, her voice quiet but laced with hurt. "I don't understand why I'm being treated like I'm in the wrong." A murmur of agreement rose from a few nearby passengers, and the tension in the cabin became almost tangible. Elena felt a prick of discomfort. She knew that enforcing the rules was part of her job, yet every time she corrected someone, she worried that she might be fueling a deeper injustice. Even so, she was bound by duty to uphold the order of the flight. "Ma'am," Elena said carefully, addressing Amara, "I understand that this situation is upsetting. Please allow me to check your reservation again. We want to make sure that everyone is comfortable and safe." Her tone was polite, but behind her calm words lay a storm of conflicting emotions. While Elena double-checked the reservation on her handheld device, the passengers around them exchanged looks that were hard to decipher. Some seemed sympathetic, while others maintained an aloof distance, as if they preferred to watch the unfolding drama from a safe remove. In that moment, Amara felt the weight of many eyes upon her, and her heart sank with the realization that this was not just a simple seating error. It was a challenge to her dignity. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before Elena returned, her face composed, but with an unmistakable sternness. "I apologize for the confusion," she said, addressing the small crowd, "but it appears there has been a miscommunication. You have been assigned a different seat. I will help you find it immediately." Her voice, though measured, carried a firmness that made it clear she would not entertain any further protest. Amara's protest was soft at first, a quiet murmur that grew louder as she struggled to maintain her composure. "But I was given a boarding pass with this seat number," she insisted. Her eyes met Elena's, and for a split second, both women saw something in each other, a flash of determination, a glimmer of unspoken pain. But before any real understanding could pass between them, the atmosphere grew heavier. A passenger from the back, whose tone had been barely audible until now, added, "I think it's strange that this keeps happening. It seems like there are always these little mistakes with the seating. What if someone is being singled out?" His words carried a note of suspicion, and a few nods of agreement followed. Elena's hands tightened around her device as she repeated the check. "I assure you, everyone's reservation is in order," she said. Yet, the doubt in her own voice betrayed her inner conflict. For all her careful efforts, the day's earlier unease was building inside her like a pressure cooker. She knew that enforcing these rules was necessary for safety, but she also recognized that the same rules could sometimes be used to mask deeper biases. Amara's eyes filled with a quiet anger as she listened to the discussion. She had faced such dismissals too many times before, each time feeling as if she were being told that her presence was a mistake. "I've done everything right," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I only want to be treated with respect." The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Some passengers whispered words of support to Amara, while others exchanged uneasy glances with those seated nearby. In that charged silence, Elena felt a tight knot of anxiety in her stomach. She had always prided herself on fairness, yet now, enforcing the rules felt like walking a razor's edge between order and prejudice. "Ma'am," Elena said again, her voice cool and precise, "I understand your frustration, but we must follow the seating plan to ensure everyone's safety. Please, follow me to your new seat." Her tone left little room for negotiation, and as she led Amara down the aisle, the distance between them felt charged with unspoken tension. In the narrow corridor of the airplane, their footsteps echoed softly. Amara's gaze was fixed ahead, but her mind was filled with a swirl of memories, of times when she had been made to feel unwanted, of moments when a simple misunderstanding had felt like an insult to her very worth. Elena, on the other hand, was fighting an inner battle. Every rule she enforced reminded her of the many times she herself had been forced to hide the truth of who she was. She carried a secret that gave her power, yet also made every moment of injustice she witnessed a personal wound. When they reached the new seat, Elena paused and turned to face Amara. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," she said, her voice softening for just a moment. "I know this isn't easy." But before she could add more, a harsh voice cut through the quiet aisle. "Excuse me, but why should she get special treatment?" The voice came from behind a group of passengers and was filled with disdain. A man in a crisp shirt and tie had stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Amara. "We all have to follow the rules. Why should one person be treated differently just because of who she is?" The accusation hung in the air like a heavy fog. Amara's eyes flashed with hurt and anger, and she opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck. Elena felt a surge of indignation. She had seen these moments before, the quick judgments, the unspoken prejudices that often went unchallenged. Yet in this case, her own heart was torn between defending the rules and defending the dignity of the person before her. "I'm not giving her special treatment," the man continued, his voice rising. "I'm just saying that if everyone follows the same process, there's no room for exceptions." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of many years of bias. Elena's eyes narrowed. "Sir, please," she said firmly. "This is not the time or place for such comments. We are here to ensure a safe and orderly flight." But her words did little to quiet the growing murmur among the passengers. The man's words had struck a nerve, and several others began to echo his sentiment, questioning whether the rules were being applied fairly. Amara's face grew red, a mix of anger and humiliation. "I have followed every rule," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why do I have to prove that I belong here every single time?" Her words, simple and raw, made a few heads turn, and some passengers exchanged sympathetic glances with her. For a long moment, the aisle was filled with silence, broken only by the steady hum of the aircraft. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at Amara, then back at the disapproving crowd. She felt the weight of the man's accusation and the silent judgment of those around her. Deep inside, Elena wrestled with her own feelings. She believed in fairness and respect, yet the pressure to maintain order sometimes pushed her to act in ways that she would later question. "I understand you're upset," Elena said quietly, trying to bridge the growing gap. "But let's keep in mind that the rules apply to all of us." I promise you, I'm doing my best to help." Her voice, though measured, carried the strain of a duty that was beginning to crack under the pressure of the moment. Amara looked away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but her voice was steady when she spoke again. "It's not about the rules," she said softly. "It's about being treated like a human being. I don't need extra help or special treatment. I just need to be respected." The words, simple and clear, hung in the air and made several passengers nod in silent agreement. The tension in the aisle thickened as more voices joined the conversation. A young woman in the next row murmured, "I've seen this happen before. It's like some people think they have to prove they're welcome." Another passenger, an older gentleman with kind eyes, said, "We should be supporting each other, not tearing each other down." Their words, though quiet, added layers to the already complex situation. Elena felt caught in the middle of a rising storm. Every time she tried to restore order, the words of doubt and bias grew louder. She had spent years learning how to manage such conflicts, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about a mistake in seating. It was about the unspoken prejudices that had built up over a lifetime. And in that moment, even her steady hands began to tremble with the weight of responsibility. She looked at Amara again, and in her eyes, Elena saw the pain of being judged not for who she was, but for the color of her skin and the assumptions others had made about her. In that instant, a spark of understanding ignited in Elena's heart, a realization that the rules, no matter how well intended, could never truly protect someone from the wounds of bias. "I'm sorry if you feel that way," Elena said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "I wish things were different." But before she could continue, the man who had first spoken up interjected once more, his tone dismissive. "Sorry isn't enough," he said. "Rules are rules, and if you can't follow them, then you shouldn't be here." The harshness of his words cut through the fragile peace Elena was trying to build. For a moment, she felt as if the entire cabin were watching her, waiting to see if she would bend under the pressure. In that moment of vulnerability, her hidden secret, the part of her that carried the true power to change these rules, remained locked away, a truth too dangerous to reveal in the midst of such raw emotion. The conversation continued in low, tense voices as the airplane drifted through a sky that was slowly darkening with the coming dusk. Every few minutes, a new comment or questioning look would ripple through the rows, each one adding to the mounting sense of conflict. Passengers shifted in their seats, some glancing at one another in silent solidarity, while others kept their eyes lowered, unwilling or unable to join in. Amara sat back in her new seat, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the armrest. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to shut out the voices and the stares. In her mind, she recalled the many times she had felt like an outsider, the many times she had been forced to fight for a simple measure of respect. And now, on this flight high above the earth, those memories returned with painful clarity. Elena, meanwhile, moved to the front of the cabin to attend to other passengers. But even as she helped a young boy settle into his seat and reassured an elderly couple about the safety procedures, her mind was not at ease. She kept glancing back toward Amara's row, as if expecting the situation to explode at any moment. Each time she caught Amara's eyes, a silent conversation passed between them, one filled with unspoken apologies, shared pain, and a hint of defiance against the injustice that surrounded them both. Over the next hour, the conflict simmered. Small setbacks began to pile up like the collected baggage in the overhead compartments. A call for extra assistance here, a whispered complaint there. Every minor incident seemed to fan the flames of a deeper discord. Elena found herself caught between enforcing the airline's strict protocols and trying to offer a modicum of understanding in a world that had long forgotten what true empathy meant. In one particularly tense moment, a flight attendant from another section of the plane tried to intervene. "We should be calm," she said in a hushed tone to one of the irate passengers. "There's no need to make a scene." But her words were drowned out by the rising volume of voices that demanded accountability, fairness, and respect. Elena's heart pounded as she struggled to balance her duty with her own sense of right and wrong. Each time she corrected a passenger or explained the seating plan, she felt the heavy pull of history and prejudice, memories of times when rules were used as weapons rather than guides. And in her own secret, guarded heart, she knew that if she could only reveal the truth of who she was, perhaps the conflict might have a different outcome. Yet, the secret remained locked away, buried beneath layers of responsibility and fear. As the airplane moved steadily toward its destination, the late afternoon light began to filter in through the small windows. The soft glow of the setting sun bathed the cabin in a golden hue, a stark contrast to the dark mood that had settled among the passengers. It was in this strange twilight that the simmering tension reached its peak. A sudden announcement over the intercom called everyone's attention to an unexpected delay. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice said, calm yet firm, "we regret to inform you that due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be holding on the tarmac for a short while longer. We ask for your patience and cooperation." The message was routine, yet its timing felt ominous, as if nature itself were joining in the silent protest against the injustice unfolding within the cramped space. The delay only served to heighten the frustration. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, and the whispers grew louder. In the midst of it all, Amara's eyes locked with Elena's one more time. In that brief, charged moment, both women seemed to understand that what was happening was far beyond a simple seating error. It was a clash of expectations and hidden truths, a collision of past hurts, and the desperate hope for a more compassionate future. Elena's internal struggle intensified. She thought of all the times she had silently endured, all the moments when she had been forced to obey rules that did not account for the complexities of human dignity. Her secret, the one that could change everything if revealed, pulsed in the background like a heartbeat. Yet for now, it remained hidden, and she was forced to act according to a system that often left no room for mercy. At last, as the delay stretched on, a heated conversation erupted near the back of the plane. A passenger, voice raised in anger, demanded that the airline do something immediately about what he saw as a growing injustice. "If the rules aren't followed, then why are we even flying with this airline?" he shouted, his words echoing in the narrow aisle. The outburst caused several heads to turn, and a murmur of agreement rose from a few corners of the cabin. Elena felt her hands clench into fists as she moved quickly to defuse the situation. "Please, everyone, calm down," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "We are all in this together. I promise you, we will address your concerns as soon as possible." But even as she spoke, she could sense that the damage had been done. The cracks in the facade of order were widening, and the conflict was no longer a simple misunderstanding. It was a battle for respect and dignity. In that charged atmosphere, every word, every gesture, carried the weight of unspoken histories. Amara's quiet determination, even in the face of harsh words, spoke volumes about her inner strength. And Elena's struggle, hidden behind a mask of professionalism, was a reminder that even those who seem in control are often haunted by the need to do better, to be kinder, to change the world from within. As the minutes turned into what felt like an eternity, the tension finally reached a breaking point. A single, sharp exchange between two passengers set off a chain reaction. A whispered insult here, a heated retort there. The conflict, once contained in small sparks, now threatened to engulf the entire cabin. Elena stood in the center of it all, her heart racing as she fought to keep the situation from spiraling completely out of control. In that moment of chaos, as voices rose and the air grew thick with anger and frustration, Elena's inner resolve hardened. Despite the uncertainty and the rising tide of conflict, she knew that she could not let this moment define the lives of those around her. Even if the rules demanded a cold, strict application of order, she understood that real change required compassion, even in the face of opposition. Drawing a deep breath, Elena addressed the crowd once more, her voice echoing with a mix of authority and genuine care. "I understand that you are all upset," she said, her tone gentle yet unwavering. "But let's remember that we are all here for a reason, to reach our destination safely and with dignity. Please, let us treat one another with respect. Her words, though simple, carried a quiet power that resonated with many in the room. Slowly, the heated voices began to subside. The angry shouts gave way to murmurs of reluctant understanding. In that fragile moment of calm, Amara met Elena's gaze. In those eyes, there was an unspoken apology and a shared determination to move forward, one that transcended the petty rules and the heavy weight of past prejudices. For the rest of the flight, the air remained charged with a cautious tension, but the overt conflict had been momentarily contained. Passengers settled back into their seats, though not without lingering glances and quiet discussions. Elena resumed her duties, each interaction now tinged with the memory of the confrontation, a reminder that the struggle for fairness was never far from reach. Yet even as the tension slowly ebbed away, subtle hints of what was to come remained. In quiet corners, whispered conversations about rights, respect, and hidden truths were exchanged. Some passengers wondered if this incident was an isolated event or merely a symptom of a larger, more systemic problem. Others reflected on the personal costs of adhering strictly to rules that often failed to see the human heart behind them. In the dim light of the cabin, as dusk turned to night, Elena found a rare moment of solitude near the galley. She pressed her hand against the cool surface of the counter and closed her eyes. In the quiet hum of the airplane, her thoughts churned, memories of past battles, moments when she had hidden her true self to keep the peace, and a deep, painful longing for a world where compassion could triumph over prejudice. She knew that the confrontation with Amara was only the beginning of a much larger struggle, a struggle that would test her beliefs, her sense of duty, and the very essence of who she was. Across the aisle, Amara sat quietly, absorbing the events of the day. Though hurt and anger still burned within her, there was also a spark of hope. She had seen, in Elena's eyes, a glimpse of a person who understood the cost of injustice, a person who might one day have the power to change things from the inside out. In the silent communion of their shared hardship, both women felt the stirrings of something profound, a connection that went beyond a single conflict and hinted at a possibility for real change. The flight continued, and though the earlier chaos had subsided, the air was heavy with anticipation. Every passenger, every whispered conversation, and every lingering look spoke of a future that was uncertain yet brimming with the potential for transformation. The rules might have been enforced, but the hearts of those aboard had been touched by a moment of truth, a moment when the simple act of seeking respect had become a quiet rebellion against a long history of injustice. And so, as the airplane charted its course through the darkening sky, the seeds of conflict and hope lay intertwined. The rising tension, the small setbacks, and emotional confrontations had all become part of a larger story, a story that would soon demand a dramatic turn, a revelation that could change everything. In the silent language of glances and half-spoken words, the promise of a dramatic twist lingered, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. For now, the cabin was a fragile space of uncertainty and possibility. Elena continued her duties, each smile and word of reassurance carrying the weight of her inner battle. Amara held on to her quiet dignity, her eyes reflecting both the pain of the past and the fierce hope for a kinder future. And somewhere in the midst of it all, the unspoken truth of Elena's hidden identity, a truth that could redefine the very nature of rules, remained locked away, waiting for the day when the rising tide of conflict would finally force it into the light. In that suspended moment between day and night, between duty and the desire for change, the journey carried on. The airplane, a small world in the vast sky, became a stage where every whispered conversation, every subtle glance, and every act of defiance wove together a tapestry of rising tension and impending transformation. And as the hum of the engines and the soft clatter of routine filled the cabin, the promise of change, fraught with conflict, pain, and ultimately, hope, hung in the air like a delicate but unbreakable thread. The cabin was quiet for a long moment as the airplane soared through the night sky. The earlier anger and whispered complaints still lingered like a heavy fog over the passengers. Everyone sat in uneasy silence, the earlier conflicts simmering under the surface. Amara's eyes were fixed on the window, the soft glow of city lights far below reflecting in her deep brown eyes. Her heart still pounded from the heated words that had been exchanged earlier, and she wondered if she would ever be seen for who she truly was. Elena moved slowly down the aisle, her face a calm mask even as her thoughts raced. Every step she took reminded her of the weight she carried, not just the uniform on her back, but the secret that lay hidden within her. She had spent her life working in silence, doing her duty, and watching injustices play out around her. But tonight, something had to change. The tension in the cabin was reaching a point where it could no longer be ignored. A voice from the back of the cabin broke the silence. It was the same man who had questioned Amara's right to sit in her assigned seat earlier. His tone was bitter and loud now as he declared, "I won't stand for this any longer. If people can't even follow the rules properly, what kind of airline is this?" His words were filled with anger, and several other passengers turned to look, some with disapproval and others with sympathy for Amara. As the murmurs grew louder, a young man from a nearby row stood up and said, "Maybe we should all be treated the same. Isn't that what the rules are for?" His quiet challenge seemed to encourage more voices from the crowd. The tension grew thicker, and it was clear that the anger was not going to fade away on its own. Elena stopped in the middle of the aisle. Her eyes swept over the restless faces of the passengers. She took a deep breath, feeling the pressure in her chest. It was time for a decision. She stepped forward and raised her hand, calling for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began in a steady voice that cut through the noise, "I ask you to listen. I understand that there have been disagreements today, and I know many of you feel hurt and angry. Please, let us work together to resolve this with respect and understanding." Her voice, though calm, held a firmness that made everyone pause. For a moment, all eyes turned toward her, and the cabin fell into a heavy silence. Elena's gaze met Amara's across the aisle, a silent, knowing look that spoke of shared struggles and unspoken truths. Then, something unexpected happened. The airplane's intercom crackled to life. A crisp, authoritative voice announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just received an urgent message from our headquarters. Please remain seated and calm as we address a critical matter." The announcement caused a stir among the passengers. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly as she listened, her heart pounding in time with the hum of the engines. After a few tense minutes that felt like an eternity, Elena spoke again. This time, her voice carried a secret that had long been hidden behind her caring smile and gentle demeanor. "I have something important to tell you all," she said, her words measured and deliberate. "For years, I have served as a flight attendant, quietly doing my duty. But tonight, I must share the truth. I am not only an attendant, I am also the owner of this airline." A stunned silence fell over the cabin. The man who had spoken against Amara looked around, his face betraying shock and disbelief. Other passengers leaned forward, their eyes wide as they tried to understand what they had just heard. Amara's eyes filled with a mix of surprise and relief. For so long, she had felt that her worth was questioned with every little misunderstanding, and now, here was the person who could change everything. Elena continued, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "I have kept this secret for many years because I believed in serving you all without the weight of authority overshadowing my duty. I wanted to be among you as someone who cares about every single person on this flight. But tonight, I can no longer hide. I have seen the hurt in our interactions and the pain caused by prejudice and misunderstanding. I have seen that the rules we follow too rigidly can sometimes be used to hurt rather than help. And I cannot let that continue." Her words carried a power that seemed to transform the small space of the airplane into something larger, a place where truth and kindness could overcome old hurts. The prejudiced voices, once so loud and certain, now seemed small and uncertain in the face of her honesty. The man who had questioned Amara's place in the seat was the first to speak again, his voice faltering. You are the owner. Then why did you not speak up sooner? He asked, his tone a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Elena's eyes softened as she replied, wanted to serve you all without the burden of authority. I believed that by listening and helping quietly, I could make small changes that matter. But I have seen that sometimes the system itself can be used to hide injustices. It is time to stand up for what is right, openly and honestly. The atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. The voices that had once echoed with anger now softened. Passengers who had felt isolated and judged began to nod in understanding. Even the man who had led the protests seemed to realize that his rigid view was flawed. "I'm sorry," he murmured almost to himself. "I didn't realize," his voice trailed off, and the words hung in the air like a promise of change. Amara, feeling both the sting of past hurts and the warmth of a newfound hope, spoke up softly. "Thank you for being honest," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I just want to be treated like anyone else, with kindness and respect." Elena smiled gently. "That is all I have ever wanted," she said. "We are all more alike than we are different. We all deserve to be treated with fairness and love. I want to work with you to change the way we do things so that every single one of you feels safe and respected." At that moment, the tension in the cabin began to ease. Passengers exchanged glances filled with empathy and understanding. Some even offered quiet words of support to one another. The rules that had once been enforced so rigidly now felt like suggestions for how to make the journey smoother, rather than tools to exclude or judge. In following minutes, Elena took time to explain how the airline would change its policies. "From now on," she said, "we will review every complaint and every rule. We will listen to your experiences and work together to make sure that our service reflects the true spirit of equality and respect. Our goal is not just to fly you safely to your destination, but to show that every person matters." Her announcement was met with soft applause and murmurs of approval. Even the crew, who had quietly observed the dramatic turn of events, began to show signs of relief and renewed purpose. The flight, once a stage for division, had now become a place where courage and truth had made their mark. Outside, as the airplane prepared for its descent, the passengers began to share their thoughts in hushed, hopeful voices. Some discussed the importance of speaking up when something fell wrong, while others shared personal stories of times when they had been treated unfairly. It was as if a small seed had been planted, a seed that, if nurtured, might grow into a broader movement for kindness and understanding. In the soft glow of the cabin lights, Elena walked back to her seat, her heart lightened by the truth that had finally come to light. She glanced around at the faces of the passengers, faces that now held a mixture of relief, wonder, and a cautious optimism. She knew that the change would not be instant, and that old wounds took time to heal, but she also knew that this moment was the beginning of something much bigger. Later, as the airplane landed and passengers began to disembark, many stopped to thank Elena and the crew. A few even approached Amara to offer apologies for the earlier misunderstanding. In quiet corners of the terminal, people spoke of how the flight had changed their perspective, how a secret revealed in the sky had reminded them of the value of every person. In the days and weeks that followed, news of the flight spread. Passengers shared their stories on social media, in local newspapers, and during community gatherings. They talked about the courage it took to stand up against unfairness and the power of a leader who chose compassion over authority. The airline, once seen as a faceless corporation, now became known for its commitment to fairness, and many customers began to feel that they were part of a larger family. Elena continued to work quietly among the people, now with a new openness and a promise to never let silence stand in the way of justice. She dedicated herself to listening, learning, and making changes that would help prevent future hurts. Amara, too, found a new strength in the knowledge that her voice mattered. She began to speak at community events, sharing her story and encouraging others to stand up for their dignity. In a final moment of reflection on that fateful flight, Elena wrote a simple message that she shared with everyone who cared to listen. Every act of kindness matters. Every time we choose to treat someone with respect, we make the world a little bit brighter. I invite you to share your stories, your thoughts, and your dreams. Together, we can build a future where everyone is valued and every voice is heard. Her words, gentle and true, served as a call to action, a reminder that change begins with each of us. They echoed in the hearts of those who had been on that flight, and slowly, far beyond the confines of an airplane, the promise of a kinder world began to take shape. In the end, the journey that had started with tension and misunderstanding ended with hope and renewal. The secret that Elena had carried for so long was no longer a burden. It had become a symbol of courage and the power of truth. And as people stepped into the cool night air of the airport, they carried with them the simple, powerful belief that kindness and respect could change even the most rigid systems. Every time you meet someone new, remember this story. Let it remind you that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, and that sometimes the truth hidden within us can light the way to a better tomorrow. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.